Brain fog, I think more specifically should be gut brain fog, because the source of your problems in your brain and your head, the reason that you can't concentrate and you're forgetting and you're lacking creativity and you're feeling overwhelmed is because of the inflammation in your gut. So the subtitle there says brain fog and gut inflammation, the hidden crisis of the digital age. And there's so many people, I talk to people all the time who are tired all day long. They can't relax and get a good night's sleep. They feel irritable. They feel brain foggy. They just feel kind of blah all the time. This is, or they feel very overwhelmed. They feel like they've got 25 hours worth of things to do in a 24-hour day, and they're just constantly spinning their wheels. And so these all sort of come under the the umbrella of brain fog, if you will. So let me see if I can go here and change these slides without messing everything up. So here, if you go out and you look and you see, like, what exactly is brain fog, it's kind of a non-specific kind of a diagnosis, if you will, right? It's not something that your doctor is necessarily going to know about. In fact, your doctor that you go to for a regular checkup is probably just going to brush it off and say, well, you're getting older, ha ha ha, and there's no pill for that, so there's nothing we can do for it. If you go to the Cleveland Clinic, this graphic right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This little graphic comes from the Cleveland Clinic, one of the best medical institutions in the world, and it just shows us, if you have brain fog, you may be experiencing any of these kinds of things, right? And you look through that list: difficulty concentrating, trouble focusing, confusion, fatigue, mental exhaustion, etc. Those are all things that we all experience on a regular basis. In fact, in a lot of the clinical trials that we will do, we measure a metric called confusion. And usually we're trying to have a natural intervention that will reduce confusion, which is reducing brain fog, or the flip of that is that we're improving concentration. We have another measurement that is for fatigue. So those two often track with each other. Sometimes we think of fatigue as being a physical energy parameter, and we think of confusion as being a mental energy parameter. And so sometimes they go together with an intervention, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they dissociate from each other depending on what the intervention is. So you might have something that's primarily improving your mental energy, and you might have something else that's primarily improving your physical energy. And we're actually going to talk about some of those as we go through this discussion. So that's what brain fog is. Well, what causes brain fog? There are a lot of different underlying. So I'm a nutritional biochemist. There are a lot of underlying reasons for the symptoms or the experiences that we live through. And so as a biochemist, I always want to look and say, oh, you have brain fog? What's underlying that? Oh, you have fatigue? What's underlying that? What's the root cause? Because if we can determine the root cause, then we can more in a precision nutrition way dial in how we fix that. If you're tired and you can't concentrate, you might think, oh, well, let's grab a Red Bull. Let's get a cup of coffee, right? Not that those are bad choices necessarily, but they might not be the right choice for the thing that is actually causing your symptom. So if you drink a Red Bull or you have a cup of coffee, you're probably going to feel a little bit better because of the caffeine or because of the sugar or because of a lot of things, but it's probably not addressing the underlying root cause. If it's inflammation, or if it's a gut issue, or if it's a lung issue, or if it's an immune system issue, which are really all of the true underlying drivers of this problem. So here's another way of looking at what the different causes are. We can look at each one of the, difficulty concentrating, feeling disoriented, mentally fatigued. But what is it that is underlying that? What's the things that are driving those those symptoms or those experiences? Well, it could be a medical condition. There are, all kinds of medical issues that can lead to brain fog as either a primary or a secondary symptom. And a lot of these are autoimmune system problems. And the reason that I put that first in my list is because a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the immune system. Your immune system is not just a shield to protect you from viruses and bacteria and cancer cells and all that kind of stuff. It really is one of your primary communication organs in the body. So when I talk about there being a lung brain axis or a gut brain axis or et cetera, a lot of that axis, a lot of the way that the gut talks to the brain and the head is through the immune system. And it's really, really critical that that immune system as a signaling organ, as a communication network, is in proper, efficient, optimal function. Otherwise, you're going to feel crappy. You're going to feel physically fatigued. You're going to feel mentally fatigued. You might feel a little depressed. You'll just feel blah. In fact, you might even feel burned out, which is a really severe version of brain fog, right? Your immune system is really, really important. So we're gonna circle back on that. It could be medications, it could be stress. Cortisol is something that can really interfere with all this signaling. So we're gonna talk about that. Sleep deprivation is a huge cause of brain fog. And I have some graphics to show why, but simply when we sleep at night, your brain cleans itself. So, your brain will actually shrink to about half its size and then expand and then shrink again and expand. And every time it does that sort of shrinking and expanding, it's flushing itself with cerebrospinal fluid. And that is cleaning out all the junk that you built up in the previous day. It's kind of like taking a sponge. If a sponge is all gunky from cleaning off a pan, how do you clean it? You run it under the water and you go like this with it. And that cleans all the gunk out. The same exact thing happens in your brain when you sleep. So if you're sleep deprived, you're getting less of that cleaning action. You're getting more of an accumulation of those, tau tangles and amyloid plaques and inflammatory molecules and et cetera, et cetera. You'll see as we go through all the junk that accumulates. So if you're not cleaning your brain, it's leading to your brain being rusty, being like literally crummy. It has crumbs and you haven't cleaned that out. And so your brain doesn't work as efficiently and as smoothly as it can. So sleep is a big issue. It's not just that you're grouchy and you're low energy. It's because your brain is unclean. And think about a bicycle chain, right? If it has dirt and sand and mud and leaves and sticks in there, it's not going to work well. It's not going to shift. It's not going to be the drivetrain that you want. I like to make bicycle analogies because I'm a big cycling nut. Poor nutrition. You knew I was going to say nutrition, right? As a nutritional biochemist, of course, nutrition, because whatever we eat nourishes our bacteria in our gut, and that changes the production of neurotransmitters. Are we making, dopamine and serotonin so that we can be in a good mood and be motivated and have those breakthrough thoughts? Or are we making more of these inflammatory cytokines that are going to get in the way of all of that? And then hormone imbalances. A lot of times we'll see brain fog sort of peak during menopause, during the male version of menopause, which is called andropause, during pregnancy, right? Everybody's heard of baby brain. That is because of hormonal changes that interfere with this signaling that I'm talking about. Thyroid problems can lead to brain fog. So you're going to see how all of these endocrine signals, hormonal signals, synergize, I guess is probably the right word, with the immune system, with your psychology, and it's a whole field that's called psychoneuroimmunology. And I've got some fairly complex graphics to make a point that this is pretty complex signaling, but I will make some very simple recommendations at the end where you can just say, well, wait a minute, if we do this, it has a cascading effect to rebalance all of that. So, I'm going to go into the deep weeds for all the geeks who are on the call right now, but I'm also going to make some very doable, very simple recommendations towards the end. Okay, so let's talk about the causes of brain fog. I listed them in bullet point fashion there, but let's dial in on a couple of them that are really important. So first, I have to say that it's not your digital exposure that is causing your brain fog. It's not using your phone. It's not playing games. It's not being on your emails, and it's not watching videos like this. It's like that can exacerbate the problem. If you're on your phone right before you go to bed, if you are, if you are a slave to the beeps and the boops, and you're always like, multitasking all the time, that can certainly exacerbate some of these problems, but they're not root cause, right? They're not first principle kinds of ideas, which I think is really, really what we need to focus on. One of them that you may or may not have much control over is your environment, right? And air pollution is a big cause of brain fog. Whenever we breathe in air that is full of you know, volatile compounds, right? There's a whole bunch of them, right? There's some nitrogen compounds, there's some oxygen compounds that can lead to an oxidation response in the body. Whenever our body becomes oxidized, that can lead to cellular damage. That can lead to those cells, especially if it happens in your neurons, the brain cells. We're going to talk a lot about different kinds of brain cells. Neurons are one that you've probably heard of before. Your neurons are very susceptible to oxidation. And so if you're breathing in polluted air, that is a direct line, so to speak, into damaging your neurons, or interference with your neurons, at least, where they won't work as efficiently. And so there are good data to show that if you're more exposed to car exhaust and smog and things like that, you are more susceptible to the symptoms that we define as brain fog. So can you change the air that you breathe? Probably not. But you can take in different nutrients to help your body protect itself from oxidative damage. And I'll say it right now in case I don't say it in just a couple of slides. The best way to do that is to eat more flavonoids, polyphenols. So fruits and vegetables that are brightly colored, berries, pomegranates, citrus fruit are all really, really high in polyphenols, different classes of polyphenols, and they are antioxidants on their own. But what's great about them is that they will also stimulate pathways inside of cells, including inside of neurons, that help that cell protect itself. Pathways like you'll stimulate one pathway called the NRF2 pathway, where you make more antioxidant enzymes. You will turn down another pathway, the NF-kappa B pathway, which is an inflammatory pathway. So if you're eating more high flavonoid foods, high polyphenol foods, or supplementing with polyphenols, you're going to get an internal cellular protection effect that is going to protect you from things that maybe you can't escape from because they're in the environment. Chronic pain is the next one that you see down here. Why is chronic pain? And it's showing this picture of an inflamed elbow. How is your tennis elbow? How is that involved with your brain fog? Well, it's because inflammation doesn't stay in the tissue that it originates in. Inflammation in one tissue is very likely to migrate to another tissue. And so if you've got chronic pain, an elbow pain, a knee pain, a hip pain, a back pain, some sort of an inflammation in the body, that can eventually lead to neuroinflammation in the brain. And that neuroinflammation has a few stages of badness. The first stage of least badness is what we're talking about right now, which is brain fog. If you're inflamed somewhere in your body, your brain in your head, is because it's slightly neuroinflamed, will not work as well as if it's less inflamed. That inflammation is blocking your neurotransmitters. It's blocking your immune system function. It's impeding the brain doing its job. And I see it's the sort of least dangerous of the whole cascade, because if that brain fog that you're experiencing right now, and you think of just as like an irritation, right? Something that you would love to have less of, but it's probably no big deal. It is a big deal, because it is the earliest signs of something that will eventually lead to depression and anxiety, and then will eventually lead to a neurodegenerative problem like Alzheimer's or dementia or some actual breakdown of the tissue. So, right now with brain fog, you're experiencing a functional impairment of that system in the brain, and that functional impairment will get a little bit worse, and then pretty soon your mild confusion is going to be like a mood issue, and then pretty soon that mood issue is going to be a neurodegenerative issue, which you'll show in one of these slides in a little bit. So it could be chronic pain, chronic inflammation from any tissue. But one of the tissues that is really involved in your overall inflammatory response is your gut. Most of your inflammation comes from your gut. Well, let me say this. Most of your inflammation comes from your immune system, and your immune system is controlled by your gut. About 70% of your immune system is in your gut. So if your gut is out of balance, if you have dysbiosis, I do that in quotes, in your gut, you have too many bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria, which is a wicked oversimplification. But just to make the point, if you have too many of the bad bacteria that are making inflammatory compounds, that is going to inflame your immune system, and that inflammatory signal is going to be transferred from your gut through your system, through that axis, through all your tissues in your body, through all your organ systems in your body, and eventually reach up to your brain. And this is why the immune system is so important for what we're talking about, is that the immune system is one of the very few organs, I guess, if we want to call it an organ, that can make that transfer the whole way. It's part of your gut, and it's part of your body, and it's part of your brain. It is a distributed communication system. The other one that we're not going to talk about on today's call, but we'll talk about them on other calls, is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a hardwired connection from your gut to your internal organs to your brain. So, there's some signals that will go through that system, the vagus nerve. There's other signals that will go through the immune system. We want to keep them both healthy, but we're going to focus, because of brain fog, we're going to focus mostly on the immune system today. So your gut health is really, really important because of what it does to your immune system. And that's really important because of what it does to your brain. And then exercise. Being sedentary makes us chronically inflamed. Being physically active, not necessarily exercising your brains out every day, but moving your body every day, reduces that inflammation. So two things. Moving your body is going to dial down the inflammatory signal, and it's also going to dial up an anti-inflammatory signal. So when you contract your muscles make a signaling molecule called myokines. They're a particular type of cytokine that is anti-inflammatory. So let's do a little thought experiment here. Let's say you ate a Big Mac, right? Or some sort of an inflammatory food. That's going to cause inflammation in your gut, because you just delivered that inflammation to your bacteria. That inflammation signal is going to come across your immune system and have the potential to inflame your brain, what we call neuroinflammation. If you exercised, that could be a counterbalance to that inflammatory food signal. So you can get inflammatory food signals or anti-inflammatory food signals. You can get anti-inflammatory movement signals by moving, or inflammatory movement signals by being sedentary. We're going to talk about sleep in just a little bit too. That's I already mentioned the sort of, cleaning part of it. But right there, your food, your movement, and your sleep patterns, that will determine in large part what your neuroinflammation and therefore what your brain performance looks like. And it's easy for me, I guess, just to say, well, you eat better, move more, and sleep more. Goodbye, and we can stop the live right now. But there's some nuance there of ways that you can actually maximize each one of those touch points if you want. So, here's what is neuroinflammation. I think I explained it a little bit, but just to dial in a little bit what we're talking about here. When we talk about inflammation in general, right? People throw that word around all the time. I see all over the internet, people are saying, well, I just did it, right? I just said, Big Macs are inflammatory. I see people saying sugar is inflammatory, or this is inflammatory, or seed oils are inflammatory, or whatever. Nothing is inflammatory necessarily on its own, right? Nobody takes a swig of seed oils. It doesn't really work that way. We have to think of it more as a systemic approach, right? We're eating a meal, and we certainly don't want that meal to be high in seed oils, and we don't want to have every meal have seed oils, because then you do get to more of an inflammatory state. But when we're talking about inflammation, we really have to define what we're talking about. We're talking about this imbalance between inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines. And those cytokines are coming from the immune system in large part. All cells can make cytokines. Cytokine just means cellular signaler. It's the way cells talk to each other. It's their language. And so all cells have the ability to make cytokines to communicate with each other. Some types of cells make more cytokines than others, but the predominance of where they come from is from your immune system. And so if we want to talk about lowering our overall inflammatory load and doing so in the context of today's call to improve our brain function, we have to think about something called priming your immune system. And so the reason that's important, again, just to sort of, reframe this, your gut controls your immune system. Your immune system controls what's happening in your brain in terms of neuroinflammation, and we can change that signaling. Every time we eat, we're changing what happens in the gut because we're delivering that food to the gut. So every time you eat, you're affecting your immune system one way or another, and therefore affecting your brain one way or another. And specifically in the brain, what you're affecting from an inflammatory perspective are these cells here called microglia and astrocytes. So when we think of the brain, most people automatically think of your neurons, right? Those are the things that are helping you think and helping you be happy or sad or tense or irritable or any of that kind of stuff, right? Your neurons are really they're really the superstars of your brain. But the microglia and the astrocytes are sort of like the immune system of your brain. So I said before, right? Immune system is in your 70% of it is in the gut. The other 30% of it is distributed through your body and your brain. And this microglia and astrocytes, that's the immune system of your brain. And you want them to be able to do a little bit of inflammation, but not too much inflammation. So you see here, microglia and astrocytes respond to acute threats like infections or injury, releasing cytokines to eliminate pathogens and aid tissue repair. We want a little bit of that. So some of that cytokine signaling is saying, hey, there's a problem here. Let's wall off this section so the infection doesn't go any further, or the damage doesn't go any further. Let's wall this off and keep it from spreading, so to speak. But if that little bit of inflammation, that acute inflammation, continues or gets out of hand, then it can actually start causing damage in other parts of the brain. But it can also impede the repair process. The whole reason for doing a little bit of inflammation is to kick off that repair and rejuvenation process. But if there's too much, now you're getting in the way of things. And so here you see this. Neuroinflammation helps to protect the brain by fighting off infections and aiding in the healing process. Autoimmune responses, neurodegeneration, or persistent infections can trigger chronic microglia and astrocyte activation, leading to harmful sustained inflammation. And when neuroinflammation becomes excessive, it can damage neurons and contribute to neurological diseases. Inflammation is the classic biological, biochemical Goldilocks response, right? You don't want too little, you don't want too much, you want just right. And that just right is always a sort of shifting target based on how much sleep you got, what your diet looks like, how much are you moving, what's your environmental exposure, what's your stress level, what are your social interactions, all of those sorts of things. Okay, so this is why inflammation is so important, is because it gets into the brain and can do good things or bad things. I mentioned your lungs just a little bit ago, so I'm gonna come back to the gut in a second. But what you see on the screen right now is probably the biggest reason why brain fog is at literally epidemic levels. And anybody you talk to, they will have the symptoms of brain fog. They will have the symptoms of mental exhaustion. They will have the symptoms of just being mentally drained and blah and feeling overwhelmed and just having things coming at them that they used to be able to just deal with like a ninja, and now they can't, and they're getting buried by those things coming at them, right? That's the feeling of overwhelm, because your brain isn't as resilient as it used to be. And the reason is because we all went collectively through the pandemic 5 years ago, and when I talk about this, it's really, really important that this is something that didn't happen 5 years ago and then went away. It started 5 years ago and it is persisting. And we know that persistence as something that we label as long COVID. For most people, it's physical lack of energy and mental lack of energy. And then for a subset of people, it's also pain, fibromyalgia kinds of pain, like body pain. So it's physical pain, psychological pain, all wrapped up into one awful basket of togetherness. And it's not because we're still infected with COVID. It's because of the problems that COVID infection led to. So let me step you through what's showing on this slide. So this is SARS-CoV-2. That's the virus that causes COVID-19 induced neuroinflammation. So this is your lung, right? So people who follow me and listen to my educational modules will sometimes see these kinds of things, and they will automatically think, oh, this is the gut. This is the gut, and this is the gut barrier, and this is the brain up here, because I show a lot of graphics like that when I'm talking about the gut-brain axis. This isn't the gut. This is the lung. The lung also has a barrier between it and the rest of the body. And what you're seeing here is that COVID is a lung infection primarily, but it's not just a lung infection, right? If you get a COVID infection, you're going to get a respiratory virus, but it's not just a respiratory virus. It also infects the gut. It also affects other tissues, including the brain. But when it does infect the lung as a sort of primary target, you see an immune system reaction that doesn't stay in the gut. Or, I'm sorry, doesn't stay in the lungs. That inflammatory reaction, that immune system reaction, is transmitted into the rest of the body. And here you see it being transmitted into the brain. Here's the cells that we just talked about, astrocytes and microglia. When those are activated, they lead to inflammatory molecules being produced. So here's all the pro-inflammatory cytokines. Chemokines is another way of talking about cytokines. They're a particular class of cytokines. And if there's too many of those, it leads to problems with your neuron. First, it's a functional impairment where that neuron doesn't work as well. And then eventually it's what you see here, a structural impairment where it degenerates, where it physically breaks down. So first it stops working efficiently, functional impairment, and then it breaks, a structural impairment. It's no longer physically intact. And so that infection has transmitted itself through the rest of the body and has now affected, here this example is showing you the brain. So that's why people with long COVID have brain fog. We could show a very similar graphic where that COVID infection in the lungs is leading to an oxidation inflammation in the mitochondria in the muscles. And that's why these people are fatigued all the time and present as if they have chronic fatigue syndrome. You could look and you could see this, also in the muscles, but also in the connective tissue and the fascia. And we could see that now these people have pain and their connective tissues are inflamed. And so now they look like they have fibromyalgia. So again, that is a bad collection of symptoms or experiences where you're in pain, you're physically tired all the time, you're mentally tired all the time. If this has persisted for a number of months and now years, now you're seeing people show up with depression and anxiety and panic attacks. And then their cardiovascular system starts to have problems where now when they stand up from a chair, they get dizzy and they have problems with something called postural hypotension. You stand up and your blood pressure drops, and your cardiovascular system isn't as resilient and dynamic as it was before. But all of that might just present as brain fog, right? That's the thing that you're going to talk about. I'm sort of mentally exhausted and I can't think and I can't concentrate. And here's another way of looking at it, that infection in the nasal microbiome and the lung microbiome gets transmitted throughout the entire body. So this inflammation can be coming from the gut, it can be coming from the lungs, it can be coming from the nasal area, it can be coming from these other tissues. We have to think of, I joked at the beginning that instead of calling it brain fog, I should call it gut brain fog, but we could call it lung brain fog. We could call it immune brain fog. It's all a coordinated system. And the reason I spend so much time explaining that coordinated system is for the same reason that I explain the coordinated system of the gut brain axis, is because when I'm trying to help somebody with a mental thing, their mental energy, their mental focus, their mood, their resilience, their anxiety, any of that kind of stuff, and I recommend that they change their diet to change their brain, I kind of sometimes will get a look of like, wait a minute, we're talking about my brain. Why are we talking about my gut? Why are we talking about my digestion or my heartburn or my immune system? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But when you dial it down and you look at root cause, it makes all the sense in the world, right? So here's how I sort of, describe the gut thing, that we teach in all of our classes and things like that. Here's your gut microbiome. This is the source of most of those signals. So here you can see signals that are neurotransmitters. Here you can see signals that are stress hormones. Here you can see signals that are determining what the immune system is doing, and that is determining what the immune system in the brain, the microglia and the astrocytes, are doing, et cetera, et cetera. And there are other signals we can talk about that we won't today, like short chain fatty acids and things like that. But those can protect the brain. They can improve how the brain uses energy, like glucose or ketones. It really is this coordinated system, which makes it sound complicated, and it is complicated, and it is complex. But there's some very easy approaches, simple button kinds of things that we can do to change all that signaling back in the right direction. And I don't want to really oversimplify and just say like it's a silver bullet kind of a thing, but in a lot of ways, this is one of my favorite slides. In a lot of ways, whenever we choose what we're going to eat, we're going to choose what signal we're going to send to the brain. And so in this slide, I use this slide in a lot of presentations, because it just captures so much of what I talk about. So much of this signaling pathway is captured on the slide. And the slide is broken into two sides, right? The red side, the bad side, the neurodegeneration, neuroinflammation side, and the good side, the positive side, where you're getting good mood and low inflammation, and not just protecting you from inflammation and neurodegeneration, but taking you the other way and building new neurons. So you can see here neurogenesis and neuroprotection. So you're not just protecting what's there, you're growing new brains. It's what we call brain plasticity. So that brain plasticity, we can grow new neurons, we can foster the growth of new pathways, we can change the shape of the brain, we can foster the learning process because of how, as the brain wires and fires, and it changes everything. And so I use this slide a lot because I challenge my students and challenge them to challenge their clients to make a change, right? I gave a talk a week ago at a big holistic nutrition conference in San Diego, and I asked the audience, I used this slide and I said, what would you do? Would you tell your client or yourself, would you go over here and say, hey, no more cupcakes for you. That's causing sugar problems and inflammatory problems, and eventually it's going to lead to neurodegeneration and brain fog and Alzheimer's and all the bad stuff. Would you say no more cupcakes? Or would you go over here and would you say, I want you to eat more black beans, and let me give you a really good burrito recipe? Would you tell them to eat more fermented foods and give them a really good way to simply put together a Greek yogurt parfait or something like that? What do you think your clients would like best? And of course, this is, hundreds of holistic nutritionists, and they're all saying like, I'd give the recipe. I'd have them add something to their diet rather than take something away. And that's exactly what I recommend from a behavioral perspective. If you add in these good foods, it doesn't completely replace the damage that you might do from eating a bag of chips, but it gives you a buffer, right? It gives you more of something like bandwidth almost, where now your system is more resilient because you're sending better signals, and it tracks all the way up. This fermented food, so let's use Greek yogurt as an example, is going to change the bacteria in your gut. That bacteria is going to change your mucus lining. It's going to change your gut integrity. reducing your leaky gut. It's going to change the signals that are sent through your axis. And so here we're talking about the axis being your immune system primarily, but it's also your vagus nerve, and it's your circulatory system, and it's your endocannabinoid system, and et cetera, et cetera. But those signals eventually get up to your brain, and it's going to activate your microglia or not, activate your astrocytes or not, build your neurons or not. So you have the choice. Every time you eat, every time I eat, I have the choice of doing something good for my gut and my immune system and my brain, or doing something not so good or potentially very, very detrimental. Okay, so that's uh, just for your knowledge. So this next set of slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly, because I want to get to the meat of, all right, what am I supposed to do with all this biochemical knowledge? What am I supposed to do? But I wanted to provide these slides to you. They've come from this really, really good paper that came out about a year ago in military medical research. And I just want to read you the title, and then I'll tell you why I'm going to go through them quickly. Understanding immune system dysfunction and its context in mood disorders. So mood disorders here in this paper are primarily depression, anxiety, also bipolar disorder, but also brain fog as sort of an early indicator of those other sort of psychological issues coming to bear. Psychoneuroimmunology and clinical interventions. So I think I used that terminology just about 30 minutes ago when we started. This idea of this whole system, your immune system, your psychology, your neuro is the actual brain part. The endocrine part is your hormones, and I guess we could put neurotransmitters under there. They're sort of hormone-y in certain ways, signaling molecules. These next slides have a ton of information on them, and the reason I'm going to go through them quickly is because, like I said, I want to get to the recommendations. But I'm making these slides available to you. So if you go to my website, doctalbot.com/May, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, we'll make the slides available for you there. I'm also, for my coaches, I'm going to post them in the community area along with this recording, so you can go back and you can have them, to look at. You can have them as your in your digital library. So these graphics just cover a lot of what I already talked about, but in very good, very clear, sort of cartoony way. And so I want to orient you really quickly so that when you go back and look at them in detail, you know what you're looking at. And so what we're looking at here is the link between the immune system and any of these, and I'm just going to put it in quotes, psychological issues that we've been talking about, right? So depression, anxiety, brain fog, confusion, mental exhaustion, any of those fall. They're just different words for the same stuff that's happening, is being driven by systemic immune system dysfunction. And so what you're looking at here is, this is your bloodstream, this is your blood-brain barrier. We should think of our bodies as being three primary barriers. The one barrier you're looking at every single day, it's your skin, right? That your skin is the barrier between the outside world and the inside world of your body. Your gut is another barrier, which is also a barrier between the outside world and the inside world of your body. It's hard for some people to think of it that way, because they think of, as soon as you eat something and you've swallowed it and it's in your GI tract, you think it's inside your body. And it is, in a sense. It's in that tube of your digestive tract, but it's not really in your body until your intestines absorb it into your systemic circulation. So your gut barrier is another barrier. And then the third barrier is your blood-brain barrier, the barrier between your circulatory system and your brain. And so all of those barriers are semi-permeable. There's certain things that should get through. There's certain things that shouldn't get through. When that barrier is disrupted, things get through, either inside or outside, coming in or going out, that shouldn't, so you always want to maintain those barriers. So maintaining a good blood-brain barrier is really, really important to prevent things getting into the brain that shouldn't be in the brain, like infections and rogue proteins and things like that. But if you have a disrupted barrier in your skin, if you have a disrupted barrier in your gut, you very likely have a disrupted barrier in your brain. I say to people all the time, if you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky brain, and that will lead to things like brain fog. So we really need to make sure that that barrier integrity is maintained, no matter what barrier we're talking about. So I'm just going to leave it at that. This slide is showing that what happens in the bloodstream can eventually get across the blood-brain barrier, and those can be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, and those can lead to the positive or negative changes with the microglia and the astrocytes, like I was saying before. Okay, this one is sort of stepping like one step out, zooming back from what you just saw a little bit. So this is still talking about neuroinflammation. It's talking about how stress hormones can lead to more of neuroinflammation versus less. Cortisol, by the way, is short-term cortisol exposure is anti-inflammatory. Long-term cortisol exposure is pro-inflammatory. So another example of that Goldilocks effect of, a little bit doing something, a lot doing the opposite thing. You want the sort of middle, the middle zone. So that's why it's important for brain fog to maintain, good healthy stress levels, make sure that we have the right level of activation in our nervous system. You're not always in sympathetic fight or flight activation, that you have the ability to shift out of that and go into parasympathetic activation, which is rest and digest, where your body can recover, cortisol levels come down. Unhealthy lifestyle patterns, we're going to talk about a little bit more, but all of these come back to this idea of immune system disturbances and where that all comes from. I'm not going to belabor the point because we just went through all of that. This next slide talks about the endocrine system, the hormones coming in and modulating those signals. So it's still all about the barriers. It's still all about the signaling through the immune system as the primary signaling organ. But your hormones, insulin and glucose, I already mentioned cortisol, thyroid function that I mentioned at the very, very beginning, changes in testosterone and estrogen that happen around the time of the menopause and the andropause. Those can all impact on the signaling system, the immune system, and therefore either amplify the good or bad signals or tamp down the good or bad signals, depending on how those hormones are going. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll look at someone's gut health, look at somebody's immune system health, and we'll get a benefit, and we'll see what's going there. And then they go through perimenopause, and it throws a monkey wrench into what we were doing. And we have to step back a little bit and say, well, wait a minute. Now maybe the primary intervention for this person to help them with their brain fog is to use something like shatavari or cordyceps or fenugreek or tonga or one of the natural ingredients that we know can help with hormone balance. And by then balancing that hormone, then we remove that instigator that has interfered with the immune system and interfered with the gut signaling, right? So again, it's a systemic approach, and sometimes you're being a biochemical detective for yourself or your client to figure out, all right, let's trace this back and see if we can find out what is at the root cause, and then go one step up from there, and then balance that and go one step up from there and one step up from there. It's not the brain that is the problem. It's the signals all the way down. And if we can address all those signals, the brain at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, is going to work a lot better than it did before. So here's another way of looking at that. This one's specifically looking at intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, aka a problem with that barrier. So you don't want to have a problem there. I'll spend just a little bit of time on this, and then let me look real quick and see how many slides I have left. Oh, we've got this one more, and then we're into the meat of it, and then we're gonna wrap up. Okay, so this one, what I love about this one is that in one slide, it's really showing you all the big buckets, so to speak. And I've already mentioned them, so I'm not gonna belabor them too much. Here's the dietary one. Here's the physical activity one. I mentioned about, moving your body and producing myokines and things like that. Here's the sleep one. We talked about the glymphatic system, where your brain is shrinking and growing and shrinking and growing and squishing all that gunk out of the sponge, kind of an idea. What we haven't talked about is this one, social health. Having friends, being connected, having support around you. Like a lot of my social support comes from my bike riding friends, right? I went for a nice bike ride yesterday afternoon, went and had a beer with people afterwards. We laughed for a couple of hours, and like, that's really, really good for your stress, for your resilience, for neurological activity. When you're around other people, you're exchanging bacteria with them, so your microbiome is different. There's all kinds of reasons that social interactions are really good for us, and social isolation is really bad for us. So I'm really glad that we have this on here. Sun exposure, nature exposure, getting out and being exposed to, the fresh air. I talked about the bad air at the beginning, pollution, but if you can get exposed to plants and the ocean and running water and those kinds of things, really, really good for your overall, all your microbiomes, your lung microbiome, your gut microbiome, your skin microbiome, etc. And then that diversity of that microbiome sends diverse positive signals through the rest of the system. So that's all really important. This one, just bringing it all together, all the way from here. Let me find my cursor again. From the gut to the HPA axis, which is your stress response system, your sociological, your neuroinflammation, your immune system, your hormones as a mediating factor, brings it all together with the proper arrows and explanation. So what to do? This is where we get to the end. The moral of the story, which is, if you want these slides, I mentioned earlier, but there's the address, doctalbot.com/May. All kinds of really good things up there for Mental Health Awareness Month and the month of May. So definitely hit that, and you can get all the free stuff. But managing brain fog, right? We can give you a laundry list and say, like, do all these things. Get your sleep and reduce stress and eat a balanced diet and stay hydrated. Because if you're dehydrated, that can be a stress on the body, and specifically for the brain. One of the big problems with 3:00 in the afternoon, like right where we are right now, is people get tired. The reason they're tired is because they're dehydrated. Separate from all the things that we just talked about, inflammation and immune system and all that kind of stuff. If you're dehydrated because you haven't been drinking throughout the day, your brain suffers and you feel physically tired and mentally tired at the same time. So the solution for that isn't, like I was saying earlier, isn't a cup of coffee or an energy drink. It's go get a drink of water. And as you hydrate yourself, that brings back your energy levels. It brings back your mental energy levels. It brings back your focus and your creativity in a really important way that, taking a stimulant isn't going to do. Exercising regularly, limiting alcohol and caffeine. Mostly here, I'm an avid consumer of both of those substances in moderation. But the main reason for these is that if you're over imbibing on those, it's interfering with your sleep, and that leads to a problem with your brain cleaning itself. And then this last one, seek medical advice. It's not necessarily medical advice because, like I said at the beginning, brain fog isn't a disease, and there's no pill to cure that. There are a lot of lifestyle interventions you can do. So certainly look for a certified mental wellness coach. Look for a holistic nutrition professional. Look for a registered dietitian. Look for a certified nutrition specialist. Look for someone who understands what I just described, the cascade, the systems approach idea. But if you want a crib notes, right? If you want the top three, here it is. Balance your gut microbiome, and the best way to do that is to eat more fruits and vegetables. Do the 30 plant challenge. Start taking a prebiotic fiber supplement. Get your microbiome diversity better, higher, and that's going to lead to better signaling through your immune system, eventually up to your brain. We did a study a few years ago where we showed that if we combine the right kinds of prebiotic fibers with the right kinds of phytonutrients, things like flavonoids and polyphenols, like I already talked about, we could improve brain function. We improved memory. We improved So we improved memory, we improved executive function, we improved task switching, which is like multitasking. We improved a whole bunch of different things from the perspective of, if we gave this cocktail to gamers, would they perform better? And they did. And so you might see that as a product that will launch, in the coming months. But just by thinking of the gut-brain axis as a system, and by using the gut and the immune system and the inflammatory cascade, we can improve what was happening in the brain and make the brain better at solving problems and switching from here to there, and doing all the things you want your brain to do. Immune system priming. Don't stimulate your immune system, but from what we learned during the COVID days, by keeping your immune system robust, not only do you protect the body, but you also amplify the signaling that is going across the gut-brain axis and the heart-brain axis and the lung-brain axis, et cetera, et cetera. Immune system priming can help you focus better. It can help with your energy. It can help with your overall well-being for the reasons that I've talked about. And then manage your neuroinflammatory balance. We want to manage our inflammatory balance all the time, right? Because too much inflammation is going to be bad for every disease state you can think of, but particularly we want to think about neuroinflammation. And so there are some supplements that are actually targeted to neuroinflammation. They help with systemic inflammation too, but things like, fish oils and New Zealand pine bark, and there's a number of them that we can point to as particularly potent improvers of neuroinflammation, pomegranate extract, and etc. There's a number of them. And then this last part here, if you like this kind of stuff and you want to learn more about it, I have a free ebook that you can get right here, doctalbot.com/level-up. And you can just go there, give me your email, I'll send you the link, you can download it. It's all about adaptogens that help us manage stress, nootropics that are natural brain boosters, right? They can directly help with brain fog, and some of them work through these mechanisms that I just talked about. And then a new class of compounds called psychobiotics, specific strains of probiotic bacteria that can help with depression or anxiety or brain fog or stress levels or sleep quality or any of those. And most of the time we think of probiotics as these gut things, right? You take a probiotic when you have constipation, or you take a probiotic when you have diarrhea, or you're bloated or something like that. There are probiotics for that, but there are also probiotics for all these other things. So pick up that free ebook, just doctalbot.com/level-up. And then the last slide is, I've got a lot of books in this area. You can pick up any of them. Go to Amazon. They're all up there. And just hit the website if you want any more information. We have so much great information. We've got certification programs. We've got mini courses. We have special reports. We've got ebooks. We've got blogs. We've got all kinds of great stuff to really help you from wherever you are right now, help you feel better, help you perform better, even help you look better in certain ways because of the skin-brain axis and the skin-gut axis. There's all kinds of great information up there, and I would be happy for you to consume it and share it at whatever level you think is appropriate. So I'm going to end that right now. Share this with somebody. It's May is National Mental Health Awareness Month, and I would love for you to help me get the word out that we can help people feel their best. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.